Good evening, everyone. Sorry we're a couple minutes late. This is the Friday symposium of the LaRouche organization. I'm Diane Sayre, and we're going to be talking about food and farming. But first, and today, by the way, is October 24th. Earlier today, Helga Zepp LaRouche convened the International Peace Coalition call, which got a completely terrifying presentation by the nuclear weapons expert professor from MIT, Ted Postel, who described what happens when a nuclear bomb goes off. And I can tell you that after seeing that, you feel like we should file a class action lawsuit and demand millions of dollars in damages from the City of New York Emergency Management Services that a couple of years ago, right after the Russian special military operation in Ukraine began, I guess that's 3 years ago now, put out this absurd video of a woman standing in front of her brownstone saying, "Don't ask how it happened, but there's been a big one, the nuclear war." So if a nuclear war happens, the first thing you want to do is go inside. And what you see from what Dr. Postel went through is that you're not going to go inside. Everyone will have been vaporized that's anywhere near it. And people who are inside are going to be roasted in extreme temperatures from the fireball. And then the shock wave will be ripping the roof off. And then the 300-mile-per-hour winds will be removing whatever's left of the structures. And the damage covers a very wide area and pollutes the air greatly. And what happens is that people have a policy of retaliation. So there is no such thing as winning a nuclear war. You are not going to survive a nuclear war. And unfortunately, at the moment, there seems to be a great deal of back and forth. President Putin of Russia has been extremely steady. The Russian demands for their security concerns, not having a nuclear armed Ukraine on their border or in NATO, not having ethnic cleansing against the Russian speaking population, not allowing the banning of the use of the Russian language. This is all very straightforward. Their demands have not changed, not in the last 4 years have they changed, but the United States is very up and down. And what I heard today from Scott Ritter is that apparently President Putin actually had indicated to President Trump that he would be willing to accept a ceasefire under very specific conditions, which is that the Ukrainian troops would withdraw, I think, from Lugansk, Donetsk, etc. And the Russians were waiting back for a response. This apparently was not even, who knows if it was conveyed to Zelensky. The United States doesn't know how to do diplomacy anymore. And the British, in the meanwhile, gave Ukraine Storm Shadow missiles and the coordinates, and they blew up a chemical plant in Bryansk. So the Russia-US situation is very tentative, very dangerous, very unstable, and therefore it is very important for people to consider what a nuclear war means and why this should be avoided at all costs. On the other major theater of war, the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, we have Israel continuing to violate the ceasefire. They are delivering about 1/6 of the aid that they were supposed to allow in. And we know that J.D. Vance, the vice president, and Marco Rubio have both been there. They wanted to be very careful to say that they weren't babysitting Netanyahu, but we know why they're there, because Netanyahu is the biggest threat to any peace deal. And frankly, the killing of Palestinians by the Israelis hasn't stopped, although there is hope. And what Helga Zepp LaRouche has been putting on the table in both cases is a beautiful program, the Oasis Plan for Israel, Palestine, massive desalination of water, irrigation. If you want peace, you have to have adequate electricity, water, housing, food, something we'll be talking about shortly. And then the other project for U.S.-Russia relations is, of course, the Bering Strait tunnel, and EIR had a phenomenal seminar on that on Wednesday, which I would encourage people to look up. But I want to get right to our guests. I'm going to bring them onto the stage. This is Marcia Merry Baker, one of the editors of Executive Intelligence Review and farm and physical economy expert. Good evening, Marcia.
Hi, Diane. Good.
And I'm going to get your husband up here too. Okay, and Bob Baker, farm leader. They're both in Virginia, but they hail from Pennsylvania, Iowa, and God knows where else. So I do have some of the videos you wanted to show, but why don't you go ahead and tell me what you'd like to do?
Well, maybe I'll just say that the videos we want to begin with are from October 14 in Mexico, because there were huge demonstrations in 20 states, at least, out of Mexico's 32 states. These were the farm states, mostly up in the north and central area. And these were farm leaders out blocking highways, surrounding government buildings. And they will get into how that connects to everyone's food, especially in North America. But what they put on the table is we have to have a national agriculture discussion. That's their term in Mexico, national agriculture dialogue, because the current system is ruining farmers, and that means threatening the food supply of Mexico. And here we are on the other side of the border. The initiative out of Mexico really opens things up for us and for other nations, especially in what we could call the West, that is Europe and so forth, where we're in the kind of final phase of agriculture for decades of free trade, of trade run by the agro-financial complex. So that's what we can hear more about, but you may not have been able to see on major media or whatever minor or alternative media much of what happened. But we have a new economic system on the agenda of the world, thanks to the Mexican farmers saying, we want to change our policy here in Mexico.
Shall I go to the video?
Let's do that, and then we can talk.
There we go. Oops. Okay, here it comes.
Hay más. Una manifestación pacífica.
Wow.
Aquí estamos en Catedral. En Catedral. Para darle a conocer a nuestra sociedad. Hemos sido muy maltratados. Gobiernos actuales. Y pedimos precios justos al maíz.
Okay, that's one. Let's try this one. There we go.
Cut the volume.
Yeah. For some reason, the volume, there doesn't seem to be audio here. I'm trying to get it. It's muted.
These demonstrations were taking place all over these 20 states.
Wow.
As you can see, it's not a small thing.
No, it's huge. Did they have helicopters involved, or was that just law enforcement I saw, or people flying banners overhead?
I don't know, but they had a lot of drones involved, flying signs over the tops of their rallies.
Wow.
Yeah, very significant.
These were up in the Northwest, Sonora, Sinaloa, Jalisco, Michoacan, and they were especially initiated Well, they were collaborative. The corn growers play a big role in this, leaders of corn. But the lime growers, citrus, they dumped limes all over the road.
Yeah.
Avocados, they dumped avocados because it cost them more to harvest and handle them and ship them up north than it does. They're not making enough money to cover their costs, so they just dumped them on the ground to make a point that a new system has to be put in. Are those the three we have, Diane?
Yes, yeah, and I do have the slides as well if you want.
Why don't we do this then? If you could put up the slide of the map of corn growing areas in North America, I'll say a few things on that. Then Bob has the report from the farmers.
Okay,
From
great.
the farm leaders. You don't have to study this, folks. But what I want to do is get physical about the economics of, I said the corn growers are very big in the demonstrations in Mexico, because in the last couple years, a new cross organization was formed in Mexico called National Front to Save or Rescue the Countryside. Now, what's corn have to do with that? Well, the dark areas you see is where on our continent, North America, Canada's a little too far north. They do some corn. But the dark areas is where corn growing is concentrated as of recent decades. So you see our big corn states, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, the Dakotas. And when I say ours, this area was made after World War II to be a kind of source for export of the Wall Street, London, Amsterdam merchants of grain, Cargill and ADM and Bunge. They went into the U.S. and through government, muscling the government and controlling credit, you got a real concentration like monoculture of corn. So now take your eyes down to Mexico. There in the West, you see some dark areas where they grow a lot of corn, Sinaloa and so forth. And Mexico has fewer people. We have 340 million in our country. They have maybe 140 some million. But what I want to make a point about this is Mexico ages ago is the home of corn. And Mexico, look, do we know, don't we know and love Mexico's eating preferences, tortillas and tacos and burritos and tamales, and they get most of their calories from corn as well as beans. And Mexico, I'm taking a benchmark, in the 20th century, Mexico was the home of terrific improvements of corn. A research center was set up there, an international one, terrific one. And it was developed improved corn, improved wheat. It was called the Real Green Revolution. And in the 1960s, Mexico had plenty of corn. They were exporting to the Caribbean. Bang, though. Wall Street and everyone, the complex said, no. You in Mexico have to import your corn because it's cheaper from Iowa and Nebraska. And you in Mexico, you corn growers, grow something else. Well, for a while they may have, but everyone remember in the 1990s, that's when the North American Free Trade Agreement came along, NAFTA. And after that, the free trade, so-called borderless operations by transnational cartel money companies like Del Monte, like Green Giant, like all the food companies, the big meat processors, they went to the displaced corn farmers in Mexico who weren't able to afford to grow anything and were desperate and said, no, you're going to grow export crops to send to the U.S. You're going to grow broccoli. You're going to grow tomatoes. Well, now the reason I'm going into this is it is so denationalized what we grow and where we grow it. So radically destructured. let me just give you a few facts. Because the good thing with food, you can visualize it. We don't have to show any graphics. But let me tell you, Mexico depends for about half of its annual corn consumption on imports, almost all from the United States. So anytime anything gets disrupted, they're in big trouble. Half of the corn that they consume is now from the United States, or 49%. Now, here we are in the United States. Get a load of these statistics. 90 some percent of all the fresh avocados we eat here are from Mexico, coming in trucks. 90% of all the limes, you might get them in bags or big fat ones, are from Mexico. And let me tell you, fresh tomatoes you cut up or in the school or hospital, 70% of the fresh tomatoes come from Mexico. Now, is that because we can't grow, say, avocados in California and Florida and Texas? And no, it's because Wall Street said, we're going to force this on you. One more factoid. We like broccoli, right? 90 some percent of all the frozen broccoli we eat in the US comes from Mexico. Now, the point is that's a lot of these operations in Mexico are displaced corn and bean growers, and they're having to work on plantations. This is completely ruinous. Who decided this? Not the people of Mexico and not the American population. I think Diane is close to New Jersey, used to be called the Garden State, where tomatoes were grown for Campbell's tomato soup. So we have a mess, and farmers have been ruined. The countryside in Jalisco or Durango or Sonora is like the countryside in Iowa. You got abandoned houses, you got poverty, and so this is the backdrop. So what's happened is a grouping of farmers in Mexico over the last 2 or 3 years formed this cross connection, cross state, cross crop group, and they are saying we're going to have a national dialogue in Mexico or else. And I just wanted to give that economics background to what we really, to the fact that we need antitrust. We can get into that later, what we need, but we need credit to reestablish farming where we want it, roll back these crazy trade patterns, and that's what's motivating these farmers.
Wow. Now, are any of these other slides relevant, or those? I saw those pictures.
Yeah.
Is that some of the meetings, or
Yeah.
Yes, we should show the next one. I forgot, Diane.
Okay.
Meaning this is just a normal graph, I think, because here's Mexico's corn imports. This is in the Executive Intelligence Review from 2 or 3 issues back, our weekly that's been reporting on this. Go look for this. LaRouchePub.com will show it to you. This is just since 2015, and it's simple. The annual tonnage of corn that's put on a train in Nebraska and goes to Mexico is going up.
Wow.
Up to about 25 million tons. But what you don't see is that it's gone up its share of dependence in Mexico. They're dependent on imports for corn that originated there, grows well, and if you built big projects and had irrigation, this is completely insane. And so the same thing, if we chose to show graphs here, you should see I'll give one example and then I'll quit, Diane. You're from Maine, I think.
Yes.
The story of blueberries sums it up. Around 20 years ago, you weren't growing blueberries in South America much. You were getting them from Maine and elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So Wall Street and London moved into Peru and said, let's have some blueberries here. You can make some foreign exchange. So if I showed you a graph, Peru's become the blueberry center of the Western Hemisphere,
Wow.
but it has to import wheat from Canada for its daily bread. And it's insane. So I'll stop with insane projects. But the next graph will show you where Bob can, not graph, the next image will show you what Bob can pick up on about the farm leaders in Mexico taking all of this on.
Yeah, this is very fascinating. And as you can see, that's quite a distinguished looking group of farm leaders. And if you notice the gentleman in the middle in the dark jacket, that's Mr. Cardenas. He's the grandson of the former president of Mexico, Cardenas, who is famous for nationalizing the oil cartels and bringing back the family farm orientation to the Mexican policy. So that was very big. You'll see another picture there of the audience, I believe. And they just brought in hundreds of people from all over, but this was a combination of the farmers, ranchers, and the college. And so a lot of young people, much more than you can imagine, were taking notes very, very diligently. So if you go back to that graph of the corn imports into Mexico, the key thing about is this. Here we've set up the North American Free Trade Agreement, which we, the LaRouche movement, put out millions of pamphlets calling it Auschwitz below the border. That's what we said in our campaign to stop the implementation of the North American Free Trade Agreement. And what you see here is over half of their consumption of corn is coming from the US. Well, what's interesting, it's coming in cheap. It's putting the Mexican farmers out of business. But guess what? The corn in the United States is the price is below the cost of production, and the farmers raising it there, at least the big ones, wouldn't even be able to do that if it wasn't for some tremendous farm subsidies that help maintain the cartels' control to slowly reduce the number of farmers. So they're becoming marginalized. Now, if you, what I'm going to do is the farm leaders of Mexico, the National Front to Save the Countryside. This is a very powerful group that came together, and our organization, the LaRouche Movement, has been working with them. They teamed up with the economic faculty of the National University of Mexico. And that's a very powerful combination, because what we did is we sent a message down from the farm and ranch leaders in the United States to our friends in Mexico. And this report was one of the first things that was read. This is the opening of that conference they had, the farmers had in Mexico. And the letter of support, we called farm leaders in one day. I did, and we got 18 U.S. farm leaders of organizations to sign on to a letter of support to the farmers in Mexico. And
Bob, can you say more about that? Because I think a lot of people are kind of brainwashed about this supply and demand business. So, and the way the World Trade Organization has set things up is people say, oh, well, other people shouldn't produce this because we want our farmers to produce it. They're creating that, for example, now with beef from Argentina, right? We're supposed to bail out Argentina, so we're going to buy their beef. And what about our cattle farmers? So what you're saying makes it sound like there's more solidarity among the farmers, that it shouldn't be that kind of pitting people against each other.
That's exactly right. And well, you see the policy at the top globally being run by the oligarchy, the old empire families, through organizations like the World Economic Forum, the BlackRock crowd, this grouping of policy, and their policy is to monopolize and consolidate food production, because the overall directionality is to reduce the population of the world. So you make it harder and harder for people, and God knows that's what we're seeing discussed now. I mean, all the prices in the grocery store are going through the roof. So the question is, how's come when there's such a demand for food, we would see the farmers being reduced, the number of farmers. So what they're doing is they're putting the farmers of different countries, they're making them compete against each other. At least that's what they say. But a good example of this is what people have been hearing about with President Trump is now calling for the import of beef from Argentina. Now, what's interesting is the U.S. We could produce all the beef we need. You know, right now we import 70% of the lamb that we consume in America. 70%. We could produce it all right here and more. But that's the process that's set in motion. So, what interesting dynamic with Argentina that I was discussing with a farm leader today is the biggest meat packer in America is from Brazil. It's called JBS. It's a huge monopoly, a meat monopoly, and they just got put on the Chicago Board of Trade. So that means they got a lot of extra money they can get. But JBS sold all their packing plants in Argentina to another big monopoly beef company, Minerva. And so what the discussion is that by opening up and bringing beef in from Argentina, what we've now set up is a channel so that JBS can go and buy beef from other South American countries, ship it into Argentina, and then export it back into the United States and get by the tariff regulation and all that baloney. Well, so the point is see, we don't have our meat in America is not marked. I mean, you can bring in meat from other countries, and all you got to do is bring it in and then cut it up and slice it up and then package it, put some wrap around it, and you can call it meat from America. And of course, the ranchers and all the people that we work with, Mike Calicrate and different, they're all saying, no, we need a stamp on it says country of origin labeling. So every time you buy meat, you know exactly what country that comes from, because other countries, they don't have as rigorous of a health situation as we do here in the United States. Okay, so you take these big corporations, you take the big Cargills, the Monsantos, the Tysons, and then like just yesterday, it got finalized. Tyson's just got forced to cough up $85 million in for price rigging back to meat companies here in America. $85 million. It's the biggest payment ever made in history. And so these guys are doing all this illegal stuff. JBS, the two owners of it, I mean, they got both got put in prison and fined huge fines in Brazil for buying off over 1,800 elected officials in Brazil. That's the biggest meat packer in America today. And they're getting bigger. They're getting ready to put in one of the biggest manufacturing plants for fake meat also. So that dynamic is what we're up against, and that's put the farmers in America in competition to the farmers in Europe, to the farmers in Mexico, to even in India. I mean, we recently had Vice President Vance went down there to twist some arms to so that India would import more food from the United States, or vice versa. And the farmers down there, they went ballistic because
Yeah, I have to say the farmers made effigies of J.D. Vance last March, like a scarecrow, and burned him in the street. So he left. They that cooled out the idea. It's called market access. That's the dirty word. The
well,
Washington Consensus says every nation should have market access for to receive U.S. goods that Wall Street or London wants to dump on them.
Right. Now, it just seems like common sense. Food is perishable. I mean, fruits, vegetables, meat. It would seem to me that you would want to buy food that was produced or grown near where you live, not ship it all over the planet. This is just
well, that's exactly what a whole bunch of farmers are talking about, Mexico and in the U.S. also, because they want to raise their own food. I had a farmer tell me today, he said he got a call from his state legislator campaigning, and so the state legislator asked him, what his thoughts were, and he raises his own food, and pork and stuff, and so he said, he told his state legislator, he said, well, let me ask you a question. If I was convicted of running drugs and put in prison, would you have more respect for me or less? And she didn't know what to say. And then he said, well, let me ask you a different question. If I sold meat to my neighbor and got put in prison, would you have more respect or less? Because it's illegal to do that in America.
wow.
You got to have regulations, and the USDA can come out and arrest you for selling meat to your neighbor if you don't have the right kind of thing. Okay, so here we are. We have fewer and fewer ranchers and food producers, and they're getting consolidated, and it is nonstop. You'd think it would go and sort of level off, but it will not level off. But the best way to look at it is like it just goes to the point where it just self-destructs. But that's what you're seeing a lot of people start to realize, especially the farmers, and that's why I've got to salute the farmers in Mexico that took to the streets, and the farmers in Europe that take to the streets. I mean, to see thousands of tractors back to back protesting for the right to produce food. That is unbelievable when you think about it. So the thing is we're joining forces with that because, quite frankly, I think one of the biggest support groups for the farmers doing that are the people in the cities. I think the people in the urban areas, I think they realize, my God, what they're up against, but they just don't probably know what the farmers are dealing with. But at a certain point, as COVID proved, you have some big shakeup in the infrastructure linkage that moves food around. Any one day in the United States, you have close to 1 million head of cattle riding up and down the highway in trucks, getting moved around. It's unbelievable. And
Why?
because because there's so few packers and the ranchers, they got to haul their cattle a long distances to get to a packing house because they consolidate, and they're still consolidating them. It used to be, years ago, you had all kinds of, like, let's say, livestock buying station, because there were so many packers. When a farmer went to sell his livestock, he'd call up 2-3 4 different operations, they come out and give him a bid on them, and he'd get the highest bid. Today, there's no bidding. You just call and get the price, and that's what you got. Because
Wow.
there's a four packers control 85% of the beef slaughter. Now, this is what the farmers in Mexico took on, and they and so we organized and got 18 farm leaders in one day to sign on to a message that said, we are experiencing tremendous conditions in terrible conditions in the United States that make family farming and ranching impossible to continue. We have been fighting the situation in many different ways through our organizational and other joint efforts in Washington and state legislatures and in the courts. Just a few points. Input costs exceed revenue for farmers producing corn, soybeans, and other crops. Dairy has been slammed. The U.S. imports of beef from it imports its beef from more than 20 countries. The U.S. is 75% import dependent for lamb. The monopoly cartels over the past 25 years have set up patterns of horticulture production that Marcia went through, importing 80-90%, of our horticulture products. And so we sent in this that they want to unhook their grains are being forced to be traded on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, where they're rigging the price all the time by the cartels. And so the Mexican farmers, when they renew or reorganize the new U.S. Mexican Canada trade agreement, they want to get those grains unhooked so they can set up a parity price orientation in Mexico, which is what the United States, and we said in our statement, the discussion about basic grains, that's what they call these grains that get traded in the Chicago Merc, is fundamental, and the approach can carry over into all other sectors of agriculture and the food supply. We said the historical capacity in the United States for volume of output and productivity has been warped by the monopoly cartels into an export source for ruining other nations' farm food systems. So we can ship products that are rigged to be below the cost of production and put other farmers out of business, which, there's big plans for agriculture in what's called the global majority nations. And this is why the BRICS countries, they're seeing this and they're trying to pull together to, launch self-sufficiency. And the term that's many farmers are talking about, they call it nationalism. They're denationalizing food production in all the countries. And that's how you put in place an international system so you can reduce food production and make it look like it's just normal for population control. So the Mexican farmers, they sent a message to their president, and they said, in the context of the tariff war Mexico is experiencing as a result of decisions made by President Trump, it is clear that they intend to intensify the economic and trade policies stemming from the NAFTA U.S. Mexico Canadian trade agreement. One of the main objectives is to complete the takeover of our national food market, which would result in the corporatization of our agricultural activities. and in greater displacement of national producers. Mexico should not continue on this path, especially in the context of the de facto trade war which we are experiencing, in which it is not unthinkable that grain blackmail could be used, to which we are vulnerable given our food dependency on the U.S. And they went on into the discussion of the development strategy must be guided by a goal of food self-sufficiency, which requires returning to the concept of national agriculture, which are maintained, which Mexico maintained from 1935 to 82, and it incorporated all kinds of land that's been subsequently taken out of production through commercial agriculture. And so the asset must be restored for a national market. And I read this statement to several farm contacts, and they said, "Wow, that sounds just like here."
Mm.
And 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 it is. So the point is, see, this is a unique thing that we are bringing to the discussion in many different ways, but agriculture like this, to people around the world. The LaRouche movement, bringing this international picture so people start to realize there's another animal out there. It's called the oligarchy, the old colonial oligarchy. And this is a small grouping of very evil, nasty thinking people, very immoral. But see, the idea is we got to get back to what's a policy, a moral policy for a human population, and that policy would be universal throughout the world.
Right. Now, I'd like to ask about how we solve this and how, because I'm thinking if Mexico is, instead of producing corn, producing avocados and broccoli for us, how hard would it be to reverse that? I mean, I presume there's certain soil conditions and things that are specific to particular crops, so you couldn't just snap your finger and say, now you're going to produce X, or can you, or are they, I mean, it seems to me also hard to imagine, what does the United States actually produce? Do we produce enough for ourselves and we're just exporting it somewhere, or do we not?
That's a good point. You got a slide there with a graphic on it. I think it says U.S. trade balance. And there is one answer to your question. You see, back in 2019 was the first year we started importing more food than we exported.
Yeah, this is in money value, but it's still true in many respects.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So you see, we're projecting this year close to $50 billion more imports of food than exports. And so, and that's after we export cheap food to Mexico and put them out of business.
Right.
So what's going on? So that's after we tax the American population to provide subsidies to farmers in America that are losing money. And at the same time, you have these international monopoly cartels and meat packers and grain cartels buying cheap meat from other countries, bringing it here and putting our ranchers out of business. Our ranchers. And you know, ranchers and farmers, they'll live a long time on next to nothing, just because their mission is much more than making money. But this is a different process.
Well, may I add one thing? Because Diane, it's sometimes good to have a 1, 2, 3, 4 approach, even if it's hard. In other words, what we have to think about is we need credit for keeping operations going, and also for starting up new operations in farming and ranching, buying the mother cows, doing this, building the buildings, and especially it can be delivered favorably to young farm families. You can just make a point of it. Secondly, so you need a new bank to do, or a new authorization to do it. And you do have to think of antitrust. We've had so many decades of Republican, Democrat, and Libertarian versions of you can't intervene against companies.
Right.
You can't tell Walmart that they have to stay out of Rochester, New York. Well, you can. You can, or stay out of Peoria, Illinois. You can. For example, Walmart is currently building a huge meat processing plant. It's not going to buy. It's done that with dairy milk. So you have to have antitrust. Those of you old enough remember Bell Telephone. Ma Bell was divided up. You can order uh, breakup of companies. You can order corporate policy, number 2. And then you can go on number 3 and 4, work with your partner trade countries. Like Mexico farm leaders said, we do not want to break off relations with the U.S. We do not want to break off getting corn in the meantime while we reestablish our national corn. So you have meetings, and so that's number 3, 4, 5. We could go on like that, including the use of science, but that's a good way to wrap things. I don't mean wrap up this program,
Right.
but that is the active side of this, and the collaboration between Mexico, U.S., and other farmers. It's just one part of the economic new framework, new architecture that we need, including in industry, heavy industry.
Right. Just the food. I have this image in my mind of where all our food is going, of 20 people with their dogs on 10-foot leashes, and they all run around and get totally tangled up, and you can't tell what goes.
Yeah. In other words, rolling it back.
Right.
And it's like Linda LaRouche used to say, you have people say, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. And he said, no, take a tube, cut it at the end. That's how it got there anyway. Put some paste in So during World War II, you had counties. We had 3,000 counties in the country. And they had county and state meetings. Who can produce more dairy cows so we can have more dried milk powder to send to the front? Who could... We really, it gets down to that. Which corn states in Mexico would have the priority? You can, it's very concrete. I happened to visit Durango, for example, which is a state that has runoff from the Sierra Madre and had irrigation works developed in the 1960s. Then they're all let to fall apart. If you chose to inject more money into pre-existing neglected irrigation, you can grow more in that state. And that's how you do here in the U.S. the same way. Get started. Kansas has plans for using extra, some of the surplus flood of the Missouri River when it floods, impound that. And while meantime, we build the big projects like the North American water and power lines. But so we need to have teach-ins or meet-ins or whatever, because we have to do this. I wanted to go ahead.
Well, I think the key thing that never gets discussed enough is we have an international oligarchy that is putting in a policy to reduce farmers, food production, everything, educated citizens, culture, and we got to address that. And see, just as an example, when we, Lynn would go back and talk about getting rid of the Bretton Woods system, floating the dollar, and how that affected things. Well, they changed the lending laws in that period in the 70s so that the lenders could loan more and more money for farmland, and drove the price clear through the roof. Then at a certain point in 1983 and 4, prices collapsed 60% in farmland. And all kinds of people were hurting. Then they brought in and said, okay, if you're still on your farm, we'll pay you to raise pigs for us, for the big guys. And now we got, 40 some hog producers that produce 60% of all the pigs in America. And we used to have, hundreds of thousands of pork producers. So that thing is going on. But the thing that now is important to keep in mind is the scope of what's happened, because now, for us to go to a nation and ask them to import our food, that's going to be getting tough because people got other places. China said, forget it, And so all of a sudden, the U.S. population, they're projecting this year will be the first year in 30 years that we don't have population growth in the U.S. Now, that's going to reduce food production. It's also the first time in 50 years they're saying that we're going to have zero immigrant, maybe even negative immigration. Last year we had 2.4 million. And so they're saying that 2025 could be the first year the U.S. population is projected to shrink. And shrinking means no increase in food consumption. So we got about, since 1992, when NAFTA thing kicked in, the free trade agreements, about 95% of all the increased income that came into the farm community has been from selling to foreign countries. 95% of the increase. That means that was about a third of all the U.S. ag was exported. Now, with exports going down, that means a massive decrease in income coming into U.S. agriculture. And you see it. I just got a report today, the big used farm machinery place in Strawberry Point, Iowa. Sales are up 30%. Farmers are liquidating their machinery. And so we got farm income is down a third, and a third of the exports. And
wait, and before it went down a third, I'm sure they weren't doing, they were not filthy rich with a massive surplus.
Exactly.
That's not why all their wives worked as nurses and bus drivers, so they could keep farming to lose money.
Right. We lost about 500,000 farmers just in that period since NAFTA got in. It's supposed to help us out. So you see all these things, and they're projecting now in 26 and 7, 25% of the farmers are going to go bankrupt.
Wow.
And the remaining ones will be in big financial trouble. So that's where we come in terms of talking about this, because what's Trump, and they're saying, well, we got these tariffs, we'll help you out. Well, what another aspect is, one of the departments that got hit the biggest by DOGE was the United States Department of Agriculture. They eliminated all kinds of jobs. And so right now, the USDA does not have a formal bailout farm program. They don't have the ability to administrate it because they don't have the manpower. And they're carving up the USDA facility in Washington, D.C., and they're moving it out to Kansas, Nebraska, to Iowa. And you know what that kind of a move is going to do? It's going to be, the staff is just not going to be there. So, so when you put this together, you really start to understand how important what LaRouche has put together in terms of a program to put this back together. Put the banks in bankruptcy, put in a new credit system, get parity prices back, and this is where we become very vital in this period.
Yeah, in national interest, there's plenty of ways and precedents for determining what production you want to foster. You can do it. We've done it in wartime, and we're called on to do it now. I have one wild example that just makes the point. Take the fourth largest population nation in the world, Indonesia. Big, all those islands, Indonesia. Their president in the last year and a half has made his goal. He was voted in for this, Prabowo. We're going to be self-sufficient in rice. We want our own rice bowl. We're the fourth biggest in the world, and they work on it, and they might achieve it this year. But instead of that approach, and who could fault them? The Agriculture Department, and for all I know, the U.S. Department of War, they're getting ready to send a big delegation in February to Indonesia that you have to buy from the U.S. For Arkansas. You have to buy rice. We're going to have a delegation. We have a right to market access. So that multiply that, because this is a good thing for Indonesia. So our job is to cross enlighten all over the world, but especially the West. Right. It's time for us to decide what we grow, what we eat, where it is, and we can do it the same way. Maybe you can think a good name for this campaign, Diane.
Well, I like what, I don't know if it was Dennis or Jerry or who said that today, but what we need is this new breakfast food called Reason Brand.
Reason Brand. Yes. Yes. Well, this does raise another question, because they're taking this so lightly, but how, and I think we saw during COVID that the whole supply chain is somewhat vulnerable as it is. Is that not the case? I mean, how close are we to having food shortages or shortages of specific items? Because it seems like if we're getting 90% of our broccoli from Mexico, if something happened with that relationship, then you're out of broccoli. Or is that the case?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's also because, see, we're in a financial meltdown. And, you know, that's why they're going after crypto and getting everybody investing in things that don't produce anything, but they're also bringing in multi layers of corporate structures to buy farmland, you know, and set up systems to do that. And so the point is, it's why the citizens, the people, have to study and understand what we're saying about this process, because we got to put in some national laws. Like Lynn said, we got to put these big banks in bankruptcy. That means, what's bankruptcy? It means you keep them open, but you don't keep sticking money in them that's not productive, and replace it with production, with loans connected to production. And that's where, you know, we talk about in agriculture, 1 million new family farms. Now, what is that? It's much more than just a farm plopped down on a piece of ground somewhere. It's a whole cultural transformation. In other words, we'd say put the culture back into agriculture, and you would have never had all the magnitude of family farms that we did without what Lincoln did, and then FDR saved it, because you had the Tsar of Russia, people all over the world watched that and shifted their policy into that to take it away from big landowners, and now we're going back to that. So we need a government directed policy, but that means we got to have a whole bunch of citizens active in the government, people supporting people that are going to take on this policy. And too many people say, well, I just don't know how we're going to change anything, because you ain't going to change these guys. Well, that's the citizens has got to take a point.
Right. So what thoughts do you have? It's time to wrap up. Any closing thoughts?
Well, I could pick up just what Bob said about the citizens. In other words, it, it's not just whistleblowing as a bystander. Okay, I'll blow the whistle and call someone else to intervene. We have to set the terms all the time. It's like this. Trump says, "Oh, I'm going to help shoppers," who by saying Argentina should send in more beef. Of course, he's trying to help this jerk Millet, whose election on Sundays. But so, in fact, shoppers need more income, more industrial jobs, more infrastructure jobs. Then they'll be able to afford the beef. U.S. ranchers can increase the herd. Our cattle herd is the same as it was in the 1950s. And even though individual cows are more productive, they're not that much more productive. Instead of what we had this week with the president saying, let's just import more beef from Argentina, the outcry, the voice here and there has to say, no, let's cancel all the imports from the 20 nations exporting beef here, from Australia to Western Africa.
Right.
Let's rebuild the ranches here. Let's eat this Reason bran and figure out how to do this for a change. Get some real mental nutrition, and just laugh or ridicule things like that business of the Argentine beef.
Right.
I mean,
I think one other thing we've got to do is revive home economics. People don't cook. They all go to McDonald's or I don't know what. It's just horrible. Really, people don't know how to run a household. And frankly, they're working so many jobs, they probably wouldn't have time if they did. And shop and vocational education, because I think we're suffering from our younger generation not actually having hands-on experience of doing anything real.
Or watching it go on around them. That is a deprivation. I mean, we can, and so people then they're subject to being sidetracked. If you're not trying to, for example, take milk. It's good to have milk produced in different localities. It's fresh. Then you just give it some pasteurization, get rid of the germs. It tastes good. Now we have gigantic milk factories in Idaho, California, a big one in Minnesota. It gets what's called ultra pasteurized. So it has a very long shelf life. It gets tired. So what does the public sometimes think? Because ultra pasteurization is good. It's good to be put on ships that are traveling in the Pacific. So you should but the public thinks, oh no, I hate pasteurization. Excuse me, do you like germs? Do you want salmonella? So people are such patsies also, especially when it comes to food, sex, real estate, and money. But food, you get, and there's a wonderful book, everyone, called The Nuts Among the Berries. And it's out of print, but you can get it at libraries. So people get funny about food, but the kind of thing we've been talking about of the public interest in where and how food's grown, and how real farm families have the means and the education to produce food and live out in the countryside, everyone benefits. And there are countries, I said, Indonesia's working on its rice growing. Great. We can work on restoring different kinds of production, citrus in the South, that kind of thing. So I think it's exciting. And the next time you go to the store, don't buy anything without looking where it came from, and you'll get a primer on what's happening in the world.
Except meat. I guess that's one we can't find out. But
no, you could have for a couple of years, and then Congress was leaned on by the meat cartels, and they rescinded it.
Wow. Bob, what?
Well,
thoughts?
Yeah, I think different ways to think about the food situation in terms of what's happening to the country and to the culture and all that. But sometimes you got to ask yourself, how many people would starve if we outlawed all junk food in gas stations? See, think about it. The magnitude of that. I mean, it's the most organized display of just about everything you shouldn't really eat you can find.
Right.
But the point
Yeah,
is,
and now they sell marijuana, which really, I mean, I guess they sell beer, but you don't think of people driving around drinking beer, but they're definitely high when they're driving. I mean, the massive, but that's a whole other story. But go ahead.
yeah, but but you know, I mean, there is fantastic technology that's developed into agriculture, and we don't have to have agriculture limited to being mega operations to be productive and to raise a family, because the real orientation of the family farm idea that was brought into our country, especially with Lincoln's Homestead Act,
Mhm.
is to develop a culture in which people can work together and to help work to develop themselves, their mental capabilities and their talents and the technologies, and to find joy in that without having to put a dollar sign on everything and measure whether or not you're big and all that kind of thing. But I think there's a massive movement in agriculture moving that is in that direction, that is uh, developing the idea of re-establishing selling their products local,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. And I think also, I think the biggest support base for that, if it was done right, is the urban population. I think they would be very big in supporting a move for a massive growth of family farms.
Yes, I think so. And I think it would be so good for the students in these inner city schools to go spend a summer on a farm or a couple of weeks and have that experience, because there does seem to be something just very fulfilling about planting seeds, watching them grow, being aware of all of the factors that have an effect on them. You know, it's eh, wonderful. And I think part of what farmers contribute is, if you're running a farm, there are so many, you're not just doing one little thing, right? You people are fixing their tractor, and they're figuring out what the weather is, and irrigation and fertilizer, and I mean, there's just a lot of that's involved in it, and they aren't listened to particularly. I'm thinking in the state of New York, we have had a huge fight with these solar panels and windmills, because also farmers cannot get loans, or they're offered money for chunks of their land to go to this foolishness. And one person in Niagara County told me actually that one farmer, and they don't do this because they want it, people do it out of desperation, but had uh, given a bunch of his land to this solar array. One person told me, never call it a solar farm again. So I'm not calling it that, a solar array. And the wells in her farm across the street all went dry
Huh.
because the solar panels prevented, the water hit and evaporated. So the amount of water flow that was coming into the land wasn't there. And it had a very specific impact on the person, you know, across the highway.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's,
Well, see, that's that, and the technologies also that are actually pretty beautiful, because, for instance, you know, they've developed now for weed control. You know, you see the farmers spraying chemical, you know, but they've now designed so that the boom, instead of just having individual sprayers, it's got little cameras all the way along it that focus and they just spray the individual weed they see.
That's amazing.
They've reduced the amount of chemicals they need by 2/3.
Wow.
And because they're not spraying, the land that doesn't get sprayed is actually more productive. So,
Right.
so you see, that's good technology.
Right.
Another one is they have got lasers to kill the weeds, and you put them through the field. They get coordinated with the satellites, and they got
Right.
cameras, and they zap them. You see them. So it's that kind of thing that could get people excited,
Yes.
but also you bust up the monopolies, and you put back a fair price, a parity price, because we have 30% of what the farmer needs to stay in business for a family farm. 30% of the parity price that we should have. And people say, well, God, if you had parity, then, geez, nobody could afford to buy the food. No, you have parity and you bust up the monopolies that are rigging the price and sending it through the roof as they sell it to people.
Right.
And see, that's what the LaRouche movement is focused on.
Yes. Great. Well, I want to thank both of you very much. I'd put a note in the chat on some of the social media, but I'd like to encourage people to donate to the LaRouche organization. And if you do a monthly recurring donation of $10 or more, you get the daily alert, the Executive Intelligence Review daily alert. And if you give $50 a month or more, you get the weekly in-depth publication, which both of you have been writing for. And Marcia, I know, and I often put together the daily alert. So please do that, support this effort, and hopefully these kinds of technology that you're talking about, Bob, can be brought to a sovereign Palestinian state when we get a two-state peace plan in the region, like the Oasis plan that Lyndon LaRouche called for. So thank you so much, and we'll be talking soon.
Soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.